In my years serving as a hospital chaplain, I've stood beside countless beds and held trembling hands. Hands that once built homes, cradled infants, wrote symphonies, signed contracts, or simply reached out for comfort in their final moments. This story isn't about the miraculous or sensational. There are no flickering lights or apparitions, no theatrics, just a quiet presence and an overlooked ache that demanded compassion where routine had dulled the senses. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Hart. 82 years old, a retired schoolteacher, wise and composed, diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer. She had been admitted to our palliative care wing to spend her final weeks in peace. Evelyn had a stillness about her, not the kind that fades into the background, but the kind that gently demands attention. On her fourth night, the nurses began to notice something odd. She says she hears a baby crying every night. One nurse mentioned during morning rounds, sipping her coffee, probably delirium. Vitals are fine, but you know how these things go near the end. I nodded but said nothing. I've learned never to dismiss the words of the dying. Not everything they say is metaphor, nor is it all delusion. Sometimes it's memory. Sometimes grief left unresolved. And sometimes it's a story that simply needs to be heard. That afternoon, I visited Evelyn. She welcomed me with a soft smile and that familiar, calming voice, so often used to comfort others. "Chaplain," she said, "you might think I've lost my mind, but I heard again last night a baby crying. Not from the hall, from this room." She didn't sound uncertain or afraid. She was sure. "What does it sound like?" I asked gently. "Newborn," she said. Short breaths. Not wailing, just aching. And it always stops before I can call the nurse. Her gaze drifted to the ceiling. It doesn't feel dangerous, just unbearably sad. I didn't pull out a Bible or offer platitudes. I just sat and listened. There's a time for scripture and a time for silence. That night, long after visiting ours, I found myself in the hospital archives. Ours is an older hospital, full of dusty folders and forgotten records. I didn't know exactly what I was searching for, only that something about Evelyn's words compelled me to dig deeper. After nearly 3 hours, I stumbled upon a thin, typewritten incident report, dated March 12, 1984. Room 310, the same room Evelyn now occupied. A young woman named Linda Travers had been admitted at 38 weeks pregnant. She delivered a stillborn baby boy in that room. According to the notes, she went into shock afterward and refused to let the nurses take the body. She held him until dawn. The final line of the report read, "Patient inconsolable. Repeated crying heard throughout the unit overnight." I sat there in the archive room, holding that report, my breath caught, not for dramatic effect, but out of reverence. The pain in those lines hadn't been healed, only documented and filed away. The next morning, I returned to Evelyn. She was already awake, soaking in the soft gray light from the window. I shared what I'd found, not as a validation of ghosts or spirits, but as a bridge connecting her experience to the unseen history of the room. She sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she said, "Maybe I'm meant to be here with her, the mother. Maybe it's not a ghost. Maybe it's just grief that never found a witness." Those words stayed with me. That night, I returned to room 310. No prayers, no songs, just silence. I whispered softly into the dimness. "You were heard. Your sorrow mattered. Your child was real. You are not forgotten." Evelyn passed 5 days later peacefully. Her final days weren't marked by fear, but by solemn grace, as though she had taken on the role of guardian to another sorrow, a quiet bridge between past and present. I never brought it up during official rounds. Hospitals don't measure echoes of grief, but I made a note in the spiritual care log for room 310. When sorrow lingers in silence, let presence be the answer. Sometimes, all we can do is bear witness. We can't erase pain or rewrite the past, but we can stand at the threshold of forgotten grief and offer presence. That room is no longer just a hospital room to me. It's where a mother once wept, and decades later, someone finally listened. Now, thank you to all my amazing viewers for joining me in these chilling, emotional journeys. If this story moved you or gave you goosebumps, hit that like button and subscribe to join us deeper in the shadows. Every like breathes life into another tale, and every subscriber becomes part of our growing circle of listeners. Now, take a deep breath, because our next chilling story is just around the corner. For over 2 decades, I've walked the halls of hospitals as a chaplain. My job isn't just to read scripture or pray. It's to show up fully, to hold hands when they shake, to listen when there are no more words, to advocate when families can't speak. Sometimes, it's just being still beside a frightened patient. Other times, it's hearing confessions whispered through the noise of machines. One of those unforgettable moments came on a quiet Tuesday night in February. The nurses had called me to visit a patient, Mr. Ronald K., late 70s, history of heart disease. I'd met him before. A quiet man, respectful, but distant. That night, the nurse said he seemed restless, said he saw someone at the foot of his bed, said he couldn't sleep. When I arrived, Ronald was sitting upright, eyes locked on the foot of the bed. I greeted him. He nodded but didn't look away. Then he whispered, "He's here again. Do you see him?" I glanced at the corner he was pointing to, and though I saw nothing, I took a step closer, not to challenge his reality, but to be present in it, because presence sometimes is all we can give. There was nothing there, not in that corner, not anywhere visible, but I didn't say that. Instead, I spoke gently. "Can you tell me who it is you believe you're seeing?" He paused, breathing steadily through his nose. Then came the name, soft and heavy. "David," he said. His name was David. I knew him a long time ago. I sat beside him, folding my hands quietly. "Tell me about David." His fingers trembled. His voice caught in his throat. It took time, painful, stretching time, before the words came. But when they did, they landed hard. They had grown up together, Ronald and David, 2 troubled boys from a rough neighborhood. They got into things: petty theft, late-night vandalism, street fights. Nothing out of the ordinary for where they came from, until one night. "One night we went too far," Ronald said. "It was supposed to be just dumb fun, break into a store, grab a few things. But then a man got hurt, and when the police came, I ran. David didn't. He got caught. I didn't. I never saw him again." Ronald stared at the wall, not blinking. He went to prison. I didn't even write. I never visited. I figured he hated me. But someone told me, years later, he used to ask about me, wanted to know if I ever asked for him, wanted to know why I never came. A long silence followed. He looked again to the corner, like David might speak. "He died in prison," he whispered. "All he wanted was a word from me, a letter, something." Then, slowly, Ronald turned to me, really looked at me. For the first time that night, his eyes weren't just tired. They were pleading. "Do you think he's here for revenge?" I took a breath, not quickly, thought before I spoke. "No," I said quietly. "I don't believe he's here for revenge. I believe your soul knows there's something left unfinished. And maybe this is how your spirit is telling you it's time. Time to speak. Time to let go. Time to say what you couldn't say then." He swallowed hard and nodded. "Can we pray?" I reached for his hand. Warm, fragile, holding history. I prayed, not from a book, but from the heart. I prayed for Ronald's peace, for David's memory, for grace, for healing, for forgiveness across years and distance and death, for love, spoken too late, but still true. When I opened my eyes, he looked lighter, still tired, still worn, but like something had been lifted. "You think he heard?" he asked. "I think he did," I answered. I left that room planning to return the next morning. But Ronald passed in the early hours, quietly, in his sleep. The nurse said his face looked calm, like someone who was finally ready. My name is Chaplain Ray. I serve in a mid-sized city hospital, a place where the sounds of sirens mix with morning coffee and the scent of disinfectant lingers in every corridor. Over the years, I've entered thousands of rooms, responding to calls that weren't always urgent, but always mattered. Some calls are medical. Some are emotional. Some are something else entirely. This one came from a nurse I trusted, one I'd worked with many times. Room 241, she said, voice hushed. Mrs. Lorraine Foster. She keeps murmuring, I'm sorry, over and over. Says she's talking to her husband. He's been gone 5 years. She looked at me with tired eyes. Can you check on her? I nodded. I knew what that meant. It didn't always point to visions or ghosts. Sometimes it just meant open wounds, grief unspoken. I walked into room 241 just after noon. The sunlight stretched across the linoleum floor in long bands. Mrs. Foster was sitting upright, 2 pillows propping her up. She looked fragile, skin paper-thin, hands twitching, her eyes red with old tears. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't speak. I pulled up the chair beside her and simply sat. When she noticed me, her gaze drifted over. Not surprised, just tired. Are you here to take me? She asked, her voice barely there. No, ma'am, I said softly. I'm the hospital chaplain. Just here to be with you for a little while. The nurses thought you might want someone to talk to. She nodded slowly, then turned her face toward the far corner of the room. Her tone dropped. He's still mad at me. He's been sitting there all morning. Quiet, watching. He won't speak to me. I followed her gaze. The corner held only a recliner, a folded blanket on the arm, beige walls, a humming monitor. Nothing else. Who's sitting there? I asked gently. My husband, Gerald, she said. He passed 5 years ago. March 2nd, heart attack. We were supposed to go to the lake that day. He'd packed the car, made breakfast. She trailed off. Her fingers fussed with the edge of the sheet. I told him I wasn't feeling well, she continued, voice catching. But the truth is, I just didn't want to go. We hadn't been right since our son died. It tore something open between us. We never really healed. We stopped talking. Not angry, just closed off. But I think he died believing I didn't love him anymore. Tears began to fall, silent and slow. I never said I was sorry. Not once. And now he's here, and he won't even speak. I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers. Cold, fragile, Mrs. Foster. I said, grief does strange things to our minds. And guilt doesn't follow a clock. Sometimes when the body begins to slow, the soul starts to bring up what's been buried. Not to punish us, but to give us one last chance to face it. She looked at me, eyes wide. But what if he never forgave me? I can't speak for him, I said honestly. But the need for forgiveness is a sign that love mattered, that it was real. And sometimes just saying what was never said can quiet the ache inside. She was quiet, then turned her gaze again to the empty chair. Her voice trembled but was clear. Gerald, I'm sorry for the silence, for the distance, for letting my pain push you away. I loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it. And I still do. A hush settled over the room. Her breath slowed. Her body relaxed. She didn't pass that day, nor the next, but something had changed. She was quieter, not empty, but calmer. No more murmurs of apology. Instead, she asked for music, songs she and Gerald had danced to. She asked for communion, which we shared by her bedside in the quiet of late afternoon. 3 weeks later, she died peacefully. No more whispers, no fear, just stillness. In the work of a hospital chaplain, we often witness what I come to think of as empty prayers, words spoken into the stillness, searching for someone who's no longer physically present to respond. But I don't believe those prayers are ever truly wasted. They're not just sounds echoing off sterile walls. They're confessions of the soul, threads woven from memory, regret, and longing. Sometimes they're a final gift of truth, spoken not for a response, but for the simple, sacred act of being heard. And often, that's all a person needs. To know someone is listening, even if it's just a quiet presence sitting nearby. I serve full-time at the hospital. Days, nights, weekends, whenever I'm needed. My role stretches beyond patient rooms and ICU beds. I also tend to the chapel. It's a small space tucked away beside the east corridor. Most people don't even know it's there. No stained glass. No grand organ. Just 12 wooden chairs, a small table with a simple cross, and a shelf lined with battery-operated votive candles. There's nothing elaborate about it, but it's sacred in its own right, a room more defined by silence than sound. Most days, it's still, but at night, especially in the hush after midnight, it feels like it remembers things the rest of the hospital forgets. It began about a year ago. I'd walk past the chapel during my night rounds, often just after 12 a.m. The halls would be quiet, humming softly with fluorescent light, that kind of quiet that makes every footstep feel like an intrusion. And as I passed the chapel door, I'd hear something, not voices exactly, but the murmur of them, a low, layered sound, like someone whispering just out of reach. Sometimes I thought I heard hymns, faint verses of blessed assurance, amazing grace, not sung but hummed, like someone sitting in the back of the room, letting the music rise softly from their chest. Other times it sounded like prayers, mumbled, reverent, but always too quiet to catch the words. I'd open the door, just to be sure. Every time the room was empty, the candles were off, the chairs untouched. Still, at first, I chalked it up to imagination. Too many hours, too little sleep. Hospitals have a way of warping your senses after a while. But then one night, it changed. It was around 12:30 a.m. I was walking past again when I stopped. The humming was clearer this time. A woman's voice, I thought. Singing the chorus of it is well with my soul. I know the song well. I've sung it at more funerals than I can count. I felt something shift in me as I turned the handle and opened the door. The room was empty, but the candles, all 16 of them, were glowing. I froze. Those candles, battery-operated though they are, don't turn on by accident. They're not motion-sensitive. They're not on timers. Each one has to be pressed individually. I had turned them all off earlier that night around 9 p.m., just before heading up to a family consult. And yet, here they were, every flame flickering quietly in the dim. I stepped inside. No singing now, just the low hum of the building's vents. I didn't feel fear, only reverence, the weight of something sacred, like I'd walked on a prayer that had already begun. I didn't call security. I didn't file an incident report. Instead, I walked to the wall and turned each candle off, slowly, one at a time. When I reached the last one, I hesitated. If someone had been here, spirit, memory, or something else, it felt like they had been praying. Not in flesh, maybe, but in presence. And if that's the case, then maybe this was never something to fear. Hospitals don't just hold bodies. They hold stories. They carry the final whispers of last goodbyes, the weight of unsaid apologies, and the silent hopes offered through trembling hands. People walk through our doors on the best and worst days of their lives. The chapel absorbs all of it. Since that night, I've made a quiet change. Before locking the chapel, I leave one candle lit. Not out of superstition, but out of respect. And on the hardest nights, I sit in there myself. I light the others, one by one. I hum old hymns, and I think about the families who have passed through, about the nurses who've knelt in prayer between double shifts, about every soul who came there needing a place to let go. People now call it the voices in the chapel, but I don't think they're ghosts. I think they're echoes, fragments of love, grief, and hope that linger in the walls, like breath still floating in the room, reminding us that none of us are truly alone. Not here, not in that chapel. There are moments in my calling that never leave me, not because they demand explanation or theological clarity, but because they settle into the heart quietly, like a stone sinking into deep water. Still, unmoving, profound. One of those moments began on a Wednesday morning. I met Mr. John Callahan after a nurse in the ICU paged me. He's been asking for a chaplain, she said. He's stable for now, but you may want to get to him sooner than later. John was 78, a retired railroad inspector, widowed, no children. When I entered his room, the lights were dim, just the soft hum of machines and the gentle hiss of oxygen through a nasal cannula. He greeted me with a raspy, "Thank you for coming," and a nod. We talked, nothing heavy at first. He asked me to pray. So I did. Simple words about peace, courage, and comfort. When I opened my eyes, I noticed him looking past me, toward the chair in the corner of the room. "Do you see him?" he asked quietly. I turned. The chair was empty. "Who do you see?" I asked. "The man in the white suit," John said. "He comes at night. Doesn't say much. Just sits there." I've learned over the years that as people approach the edge of life, their language starts to shift. The line between what's seen and unseen can blur. But John didn't look afraid. He didn't seem confused. "He talks to me sometimes," he added. Said it's almost time. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't feel wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't try to rationalize or offer explanations. I just listened. I didn't try to explain anything to him. I simply acknowledged what he said and asked how it made him feel. "Peaceful," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Like I'm not alone in this." I visited him again the next day, and then the day after that. Each time, he mentioned the man in the white suit. He never asked who the man was. He never called him an angel or made any dramatic claims. It wasn't fantastical, just a presence. Familiar, constant, reassuring. On the fourth night, I got another page from the nurse's station. "He's asking for you," she said softly. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I arrived at his room. The hallway was still and cold, lit only by the muted overhead lights. John was awake. His eyes were fixed on that same corner, on that same empty chair. His voice was weaker now, rougher around the edges. "Tonight," he whispered. I moved the chair closer to his bedside and sat down. "I'm here," I said. "I know," he replied. "Both of you are." He reached out for my hand. I took it gently and held it. We sat like that in silence, 5 minutes, maybe 10, just the sound of the machines breathing for him, just the hush of time slowing down. Then he closed his eyes. His breathing slowed with it. There were no alarms, no sudden rush of doctors or nurses, just a stillness, soft and sacred, like something was quietly settling into place. Eventually, the monitor sounded its final tone, a long, flat line. The nurse stepped into the room and simply nodded. I stayed a little longer, whispered a prayer. I think it was more for myself than for John. When I finally stepped back out into the corridor, it felt like the world was holding its breath. A long, quiet hallway where grief and grace sometimes pass each other in silence. I've often reflected on John's final days, not to solve the mystery of who the man in white was, not to dissect it theologically, but simply to remember what it means to be there. Because sometimes our task as chaplains, as caregivers, as fellow human beings, isn't to explain the mysteries. It's to sit with someone through them, to accompany them gently, without judgment, to be a steady presence in the dark. Maybe that's what John needed most at the end. Not answers, just someone in a chair beside him when the world got quiet and time drew near. Thank you all for joining me on these deeply human journeys. Your support means the world, and reading your reactions and your own personal experiences in the comments, it's one of the most meaningful parts of this work. If these stories gave you chills or made you pause and reflect, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more. We explore the haunting, the emotional, the unexplained, and always with reverence. Have you ever had an experience like John's? Or maybe you have your own story of an unexplainable presence, a quiet moment that still echoes in your heart? I'd love to hear it in the comments below. Each of your stories adds something special to this growing community of listeners, of feelers, of souls who believe there's more out there than we often see. And if someone you know might appreciate a good scare or a good cry, please share this video with them. There's more to come, more stories to tell. And remember, sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that can happen to any of us. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, if you dare.